My name is Carol, and I'm 22. Fresh out of college, I have a story about my house. Well, technically my mother's house. It was hers until she lost her battle with intestinal cancer 4 years ago, leaving it to me. Mom was always a planner. Even before the diagnosis, she ensured everything was in order. The house was fully paid for, purchased before she even met my dad, a foresight I'm eternally grateful for. She also made sure I knew about the will. "This way, you'll always have a home," she'd said, her voice unwavering despite the ordeal she was facing. Life wasn't always this complex. My parents' marriage lasted a decade before Dad left us for another woman. I was 9 when he packed his bags. No arguments, no custody battles, no property disputes. He just left. His only concession was covering my college tuition. He established a dedicated account and transferred the full amount immediately. I suppose that was his way of providing child support. Dad quickly started a new family with Linda, and they had a daughter soon after, 10 years my junior. I would visit occasionally, staying at their rented house, but it never truly felt comfortable. Linda was often preoccupied with my half-sister, praising her accomplishments or fussing over her hair. Dad was perpetually working, claiming the need to provide for his family. It's ironic how I no longer seemed to fit into that category. "Carol, would you like to join us for dinner?" Linda would ask, but her tone always implied she hoped I'd refuse. We maintained a cordial relationship: birthday cards, holiday greetings, the occasional strained family dinner. It was all very formal and polite, in that awkward way that makes you uncomfortable. Mom earned a good living as a senior accountant, so when the cancer struck, she could dedicate herself fully to treatment. I was 14 when we received the diagnosis. She resigned immediately to concentrate on fighting the illness. For 4 years, our lives revolved around hospital appointments and therapy sessions. Mom never once complained. She just kept fighting, kept planning, kept ensuring I would be all right. But cancer doesn't respect plans. I was 18 when she passed, just weeks before my college move to another state. Grief overwhelmed me. I was barely functional. That's when Dad surprised me by stepping up. He, Linda, and my half-sister moved in temporarily to help me cope. I was too numb to question it, too thankful for the support. "We'll help you through this," Dad said, putting his arm around me. Linda nodded sympathetically while my half-sister explored my newly inherited home. By summer's end, I faced a dilemma. College was starting soon, and I had no idea what to do with Mom's house, now mine. Selling it was unbearable, but leaving it vacant for 4 years seemed unwise. Then, one morning at breakfast, Dad presented a proposition. "Carol," he began, pushing his coffee mug aside, "I've been thinking, what if we stayed here? We cover all the expenses, maintain the property. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing while you're at school." I glanced at Linda, flipping pancakes at the stove. She turned, offering a smile. "It would be good for all of us," she added. Sophie was already enrolled in the local school, and the house would be well cared for. It made sense. During the 2 months they'd been staying with me, things had been surprisingly harmonious. Linda had become less distant, and Sophie, my half-sister, had actually begun treating me like a sister, not just some occasional visitor. So, I agreed. In retrospect, it seemed like the ideal arrangement. I packed Mom's belongings, keeping some and storing the rest in the attic. I left for college feeling confident in my decision. Over the next 4 years, I returned home during holidays and summer breaks. Those visits were genuinely pleasant. Linda would prepare elaborate welcome home dinners. "I made your favorite lasagna," she'd declare, as if she'd always known my preferences. Sophie would pull me to her room, eager to show off her latest artwork or recount school gossip. During Christmas breaks, we'd decorate the tree together. Dad would hoist Sophie up to place the star on top, while Linda and I playfully debated whether tinsel was tacky or classic. We'd gather around, sipping hot chocolate, and sometimes I could almost forget this wasn't the family I grew up with. Summer visits were different, longer, more relaxed. Sophie and I would spend afternoons at the community pool, and I'd assist her with summer reading. Linda would invite me to her book club meetings, and we'd genuinely enjoy dissecting whichever romance novel they were discussing. "Your sister is so good with Sophie," I overheard Linda tell Dad one evening. "It's nice having her home." That warmed me, suggesting we'd truly become a real family. I called regularly during the semesters, weekly chats with Dad about my classes, Catching up with Linda about house upkeep. The roses you planted are blooming beautifully, Carol. And FaceTime sessions with Sophie, who kept me abreast of her middle school adventures. Everything seemed perfect. We'd forged this unusual yet functional family dynamic, built upon the foundation of my mother's house. I never imagined it could unravel so swiftly, but I suppose that's how things go sometimes. At 22, with my degree in hand and a job lined up back home, I was ready for the next chapter. I'd accepted a position at Marshall & Brooks Financial in my hometown. They'd interviewed me via Zoom and offered me the position immediately. Everything seemed perfect, or so I thought. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house on a sunny June afternoon. I paused, taking in the familiar sight. Mom's rose bushes were in full bloom, although they looked different from how she'd tended them. The lawn was neatly trimmed and new curtains adorned the windows, small alterations that had occurred during my college years. Wheeling my suitcases up the walkway, I reached for my keys, smiling, already picturing myself sleeping in my old room that night. But when I tried to unlock the door, something was amiss. The key wouldn't turn. I tried again, figuring I was just tired from the trip, but no, the key definitely didn't fit. "What the hell?" I muttered, attempting the key one last time before resorting to knocking loudly, assuming someone might be inside watching television. Linda opened the door, her eyes widening in astonishment. She wore an apron and had flour on her hands, as if she'd been baking. "Carol, what are you doing here?" I wheeled my suitcase inside, noticing Dad and Sophie in the living room, both equally surprised by my arrival. Sophie was lounging on the couch with her phone, while Dad sat in his favorite armchair, actually Mom's old armchair, reading something on his tablet. "What do you mean?" "I live here," I replied, observing what appeared to be subtle decor changes in the living room. "Why were the locks changed?" Dad stammered, touching his neck, a nervous tic he'd always had. "Oh, that. Yeah, I changed them last month for safety. You know, there were a few break-ins in the neighborhood." "You could have told me," I said, striving to keep the irritation from my voice, or sent me a new key. "I mean, this is my house." "We weren't expecting you," Linda said cautiously, arms folded across her chest. She'd wiped the flour off her hands and looked increasingly uneasy. "Why not? I graduated last week. I told you guys I was coming home to start my new job." I looked between them, feeling increasingly apprehensive. Something felt wrong about their reactions. Sophie had even put down her phone and was watching the scene unfold with a peculiar expression. "Carol," Dad interrupted suddenly, standing up. "Can we talk in the office for a minute?" I followed him into Mom's old office. My office, technically. The room still displayed Mom's degrees on the wall and her collection of financial reference books on the shelves. He closed the door behind us, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he turned to face me. "Listen, honey," he began, his voice low. "There's something you need to know." "Linda? Well, she thinks this house belongs to me." I stared at him, bewildered. "I told her it was my house," he continued, avoiding my gaze. "That I gave it to your mother and you out of kindness after the divorce, and that after your mom passed, it reverted back to me. She thinks she's just been living here because I allowed it." I must have stood there gaping at Dad for a full minute before I could speak. My initial impulse was to confront Linda and reveal everything. Now I understood her surprised look when I arrived. In her mind, I was merely a freeloader crashing at their house. "I have to tell her the truth," I said, moving toward the door. But Dad grabbed my arm. "Please, Carol," he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. "Just give me a little time. I'll find us a new place to live, I promise. I just need to figure out how to tell her without destroying our marriage." "Destroying your marriage?" I hissed. "What about what you're doing to me?" He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, offering them like a peace offering. "These are for the new locks. Please, sweetheart, just a few weeks. That's all I'm asking. Let me handle this my way." I took the keys, feeling nauseous. "Fine," I said finally. "But this is insane, Dad. You know that, right?" He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, honey. I'll make this right, I promise." But things immediately deteriorated. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Linda kept shooting me looks across the table. All her previous warmth vanished. The woman who used to bake my favorite cookies and invite me to book club now treated me like a stranger. "More potatoes, Dad?" Sophie asked, completely oblivious to the strained atmosphere. "Would anyone mind if I redecorated the living room?" Linda asked abruptly, avoiding eye contact. "The current setup is a bit dated." I tightened my grip on my fork, knowing she was referring to Mom's furniture arrangement. Dad coughed awkwardly and changed the subject. The next morning, I was making coffee when Linda cornered me in the kitchen. She was still in her robe, hair uncombed, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Carol," she said, leaning against the counter, "I think we need to talk about your situation." "My plans, yes. When are you planning to look for your own place?" she asked, her tone as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. "Now that you have a job lined up, you should start thinking about moving out. You're a grown woman now, after all." I slowly sipped my coffee, mentally counting to 10. "Actually, I've spoken with Dad about staying here for a while, and he's okay with it." Linda's lips thinned, and for a second, I braced myself for an argument. Instead, she simply turned and left the kitchen, leaving me with my cooling coffee and a rising sense of unease about the coming weeks. The next 2 weeks felt like navigating a minefield. Linda's demeanor went from frosty to outright passive-aggressive. She'd accidentally wash my clothes with colors that bled, claiming she'd forgotten which laundry basket was mine. She'd prepare family dinners, but conveniently only make enough for 3, feigning surprise when I sat down at the table. If I tried to watch TV in the living room, she'd suddenly need to vacuum right then and there. If I used the kitchen for breakfast, she'd intrude and start rearranging cupboards, muttering about how some people never learned tidiness. She even relocated my mother's cherished vase from the mantelpiece to an obscure corner shelf, stating it clashed with her new decorating scheme. The most painful part was watching Sophie follow her mother's example. My half-sister, who just weeks prior had been sharing memes and seeking my advice on boys, now rolled her eyes at my presence. She began referring to me as that girl when speaking to her friends on the phone, ensuring I overheard. Despite the domestic tension, my career was taking off. I visited Marshall and Brooks Financial, where they showed me my future workspace, a pleasant corner office with a view of the city. My future colleagues appeared amiable and welcoming, particularly Sarah from Risk Assessment, who invited me to lunch. "When do you start?" she asked as we ate our sandwiches. 2 weeks, I replied, just enough time to get settled at home. That evening at dinner, I announced my start date, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy. "They showed me my office today." "I start in 2 weeks. Linda's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down with exaggerated care. "Well, isn't that wonderful? Once you receive your first paycheck, you can start searching for your own apartment. I know of some lovely complexes across town, very reasonable for young professionals." I caught my dad's pleading gaze across the table, his eyes silently urging me to stay silent, to preserve the fragile peace. I picked at my peas and said nothing. To escape the strained atmosphere at home, I started reconnecting with old high school friends. Katie and Jessica were still in town, and we'd meet for coffee or shopping, effortlessly slipping back into our familiar routines. However, returning home was always unsettling. I'd enter to hushed conversations emanating from the kitchen or living room, which would cease abruptly upon my arrival. Dad and Linda would separate like startled teenagers, papers hurriedly stuffed into drawers, forced smiles plastered on their faces. Saturday morning, I awoke to an unusually quiet house. No sounds of Linda's weekend cooking, no music blaring from Sophie's room, no Dad watching sports on TV. The stillness felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. I went downstairs in my pajamas, checking each room. The kitchen was immaculate, not merely clean, but unused since the previous evening. The living room was empty, the cushions perfectly arranged on the sofa. Sophie's boots, which usually cluttered the entryway, were gone. Even Dad's car was missing from the driveway. I checked my phone. No messages, no explanation of their whereabouts. My initial thought was that they had gone out for breakfast, but something felt amiss. They never left without a note. Even during these tense weeks, they'd maintained that basic courtesy. I tried calling Dad, but it went straight to voicemail. Strange. I tried several more times with the same result. Finally, I called Linda. She answered on the fourth ring, just as I was about to give up. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, hostile in a way I'd never heard before. In the background, I could hear the sound of waves and what sounded like tropical music. "I just wanted to know where everyone is," I stammered, taken aback by her tone. I woke up and the house was empty. She laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound that made my stomach churn. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. First-class flights, luxury resort, the whole 9 yards. We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along and expecting us to pay for you, too. Not that you'd know anything about paying for things yourself." "What?" I started to say, but she cut me off. "Save it. I'm sick of this whole situation. You're nothing but a lazy freeloader living in our house like you own the place. Your father might put up with it, but I'm done. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman living in our house, eating our food, using our—" My hands trembled so violently I could barely grip the phone. I sank into a kitchen chair, my mother's chair actually, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. "Linda, No, you listen to me," she snarled. "Your father never loved you. You were just an obligation. He already wasted enough money on your college education, and now you're squatting in our house like some entitled princess. Well, I've had enough. Did you think you could just live here forever, mooching off us while we work hard to maintain this home?" I could hear Sophie giggling in the background and Dad's muffled voice saying something unintelligible. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "When we get back," she continued, her voice dripping with venom, "I want you gone. Do you understand me? Pack your things and get out of our house. If you're still here when we return, I'll throw you out myself, and trust me, I won't be gentle about it. I don't care where you go. Live on the street for all I care. You're not our problem anymore. And don't bother trying to call your father. He agrees with me. He's just too spineless to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Carol, or don't. I really couldn't care less." The line went dead. I sat in the kitchen for what felt like hours, fury slowly replacing shock. They were living in my house, the house my mother had worked for, the house she had left to me, and they had the audacity to call me a freeloader to try and evict me. I'd had enough of Dad's lies. I blocked their numbers, my hands still shaking, now with anger rather than hurt. Then I systematically went through the house, gathering their belongings. Linda's expensive clothes, Sophie's school things, Dad's golf clubs, everything went into boxes and suitcases. I worked tirelessly throughout Saturday, fueled by rage and bitter disappointment. By Sunday morning, I had their lives packed and stacked in the garage. I located a 24-hour locksmith. He worked swiftly, changing the locks on all the doors. It was a considerable expense, but worth every penny. As he finished, I handed him my credit card, a strange sense of satisfaction washing over me as I clutched the new keys. Monday morning, I started my new job at Marshall & Brooks. For 2 weeks, I immersed myself in work, learning the ropes, making new acquaintances, trying not to dwell on the impending confrontation. I left their belongings in the garage but restored the house to how Mom had kept it, erasing every trace of Linda's decorating choices. Then came Friday. I pulled into the driveway after work to find them standing there, Dad looking anxious, Linda red-faced with fury, and Sophie lurking behind with a scowl. They must have just returned from their trip. Their luggage was still in their rental car. Linda started screaming before I even exited my car. "How dare you change our locks? How dare you lock us out of our own house?" I walked calmly past them, unlocking the door. Linda followed, still yelling, "We're calling the police! This is breaking and entering! This is our house!" I turned to face them, something inside me finally snapping. "No, Linda, it's not your house. It never was. This house belongs to me. My mother bought it before she even met Dad. She left it to me in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it temporarily." Linda laughed, but it was an unsteady sound. She looked at Dad. "Tell her she's lying! Tell her this is our house!" Dad wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. He just shrugged, his shoulders slumping. "She's telling the truth. The house. It was always hers." I watched the truth sink in, Linda's face transforming from rage to calculation in a matter of seconds. Her entire demeanor shifted like a flipped switch. "Oh, Carol, sweetheart," she said, forcing a laugh. "You didn't think I was serious on the phone, did you? I was just joking. You know how I can get sometimes. All that sun and those tropical cocktails went to my head." "Stop it," I said quietly, but she continued. "We're family, remember? All those nice times we had, the book club meetings, the holiday dinners. We can have that again." She took a step towards me, arms outstretched as if to hug me. Dad jumped in then, his voice thick with emotion. "Princess, I'm so sorry. I know I handled this all wrong, but I love you. You're my daughter. Please, can't we work this out?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The father who left when I was 9, who paid for my education but missed my life, who lied about my house, my inheritance, my mother's legacy. Work what out, Dad? The fact that you lied to your wife about owning my house, or the fact that you stood by while she planned to throw me out of it? Linda turned back to me, that forced smile reappearing. "Carol, let's be reasonable. We can all live here together. We'll pay rent." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave." That's when Linda's mask finally cracked. "You ungrateful little... After everything we've done for you, you'd throw your own family out on the street?" I felt oddly calm as I replied, "You just spent, what, $10,000 on a luxury vacation you deliberately hid from me? I'm pretty sure you can afford an apartment." "Carol, please," Dad tried again, reaching for my arm. "I know I messed up, but..." "No," I cut him off. "You didn't mess up. You lied. For 4 years, you let your wife believe she owned my mother's house. You watched her redecorate, rearrange, erase every trace of Mom. And when she planned to throw me out, you said nothing." "I was going to tell her the truth," he protested. After I was gone. After she'd finished making your house her home." I shook my head. "I'm done. Get your things and get out." I walked inside and closed the door, ignoring Linda's shouts of ingratitude and cruelty. Through the window, I watched them loading boxes from the garage into their rental car. Linda was still ranting, her face crimson with fury. Sophie was crying. Dad just looked defeated. It took 3 trips to get everything. As they loaded the last box, Dad tried one last time, knocking on the door. I didn't open it. They finally drove away as the sun was setting. The following day, Dad tried calling from a new number. "Carol, please," he begged. "We can fix this." "No, Dad, we can't," I replied. "Linda made it very clear how you all really feel about me. A freeloader, an obligation, someone you never loved. Maybe those were her words, but your silence spoke volumes." That was 2 months ago. I still live in Mom's house. My house. I've repainted the walls, planted new roses in the garden, made it my own again. Sometimes I think about them, wondering where they landed. But mostly, I think about Mom, and how she ensured I'd always have a home, no matter what. Dad still tries to call occasionally, from different numbers. I don't answer anymore. Some bridges once burned should remain ash. The strange thing is, I'm happier now. My job is going well. I've made new friends at work, and for the first time since Mom died, I feel at peace in this house. Sometimes healing means letting go of people, of lies, of the fairy tale of family you desperately wanted to believe in.